Okay.
And I knew that, technically mortar, right? Or thin set or something else like that. And I said, nah, I'm using glue.
You said, where's this going to go?
Exactly. I said, what is PL not going to
That's
glue?
what everyone says.
Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. My name's Justin. I'll be your host. Sitting with me today are Rob Yegan, who didn't turn the sound off on his computer,
Just did.
and Brian Pontalillo, who just did the same as well.
Taking care of business.
TCBing. We got Jeff working the dials, shooting the video that you can find at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. And be sure to also go there and check out the show notes produced by Michael Moran Alterio. They're always very entertaining. Yeah,
Full name.
He wants Moran in the magazine, so we do that for him.
I always get concerned when that kind of stuff bubbles up, but...
Well, I'll let you take it up with Mike. We got a usual bunch of listener questions today, some feedback. All of that was addressed to us at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. That one was not on purpose. I really just mispronounced it.
I think that's why you do it, so you can just kind of, when you do mispronounce them, you just float through.
Throw in a mispronunciation every once in a while just for fun. So, in other news, I'm going to be on Shop Talk Live. I'm trying to figure out Jeff and I were just working out the timing because we record on a slightly different schedule, Fine Woodworking and Fine Home Building. But if we are correct, I am in both places at once right now.
Awesome.
You will download 2 episodes to your listening device, and I will be on both this podcast and that one. I'll be on that one as a guest. We're going to talk about
I'm not sure.
setting up shop and that other stuff.
Okay.
What?
You said it was Shop Talk Live with Fine Woodworking, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Shop Talk Live.
Shop Talk Live. FineWoodworking.com.
I'm gonna talk about. I'm gonna drop a little bit of air sealing and insulation knowledge on
Of
them.
course you are. Of course you are. A little roof venting to.
I haven't recorded it yet, but I assume that it's gonna go great. So be sure to download the episode and find out.
You should skip all of that stuff that you know about and start telling them how to cut dovetails.
Yeah.
Right away.
Just get in there.
Yeah.
How to tune up a plane.
Listen,
Yeah.
guys, I've been listening for 150 episodes of your show, and I gotta tell you, I think you're doing it wrong.
Well, it's
Not
funny.
enough drywall screws.
Well, here's the deal. On that show, all they're going to be talking about is how to get sharp.
Yeah.
And when to know you're sharp.
Yeah.
And all you're going to talk about is roof venting and insulation.
Yeah.
So it's going to be great.
I'm gonna say, yeah, your plane irons might be sharp and your dovetail's tight, but how's the ventilation in that shop?
Your shop's an energy hog.
Yeah. Yeah. And, that's what really matters. So we have some feedback on our somewhat recent discussion of Brian contemplating the potability of the condensate water from his heat pump water heater.
This is really got a life. It's got a lifespan.
Apparently, this is the thing that people wanted to write to us about. Did you have any cold glasses of condensate water recently?
I haven't.
I've not tried it. That's good. Because Kate wrote to us, Brian was mentioning using the gray water from his heat pump water heater for his washing machine, and you all speculated on whether the water is potable. We looked into this a little while ago because we have a portable dehumidifier and wondered the same thing. We discovered, in parentheses, Google, that there are at least a couple of companies making a, quote, atmospheric water generator, end quote, machine that extracts water from the air, filters it, and treats it in order to produce potable water. One of the machines is a 5-part filtration system. They're quite pricey as far as a household appliance goes, but if I lived in Florida, I'd consider it because the tap water is simply vile. I can vouch for that, by the way. Pretty much you get down towards like the middle to lower part of the East Coast, and the water gets real bad.
Couldn't drink it.
Yeah, it's pretty. You'll start to notice it in like, well, at least where I was, in motels. Be like, you got to brush your teeth, and you're like, good Lord.
It tastes bad?
Yeah, to me anyway. I mean,
They got bad water down there, Brian.
everybody has different preferences. I mean, I grew up on city water, and I used to think that well water tasted bad. So it's just what you're used to, I guess.
This didn't answer the question, though, right?
It didn't, and that's what I was wondering. I think she's implying that it's not potable because this system that they looked into, this atmospheric water generator, has filters.
Yeah.
But
that could be, they're just selling you a bunch of filters.
Because sometimes you need it, and they want to be sure.
Well,
maybe.
Then Alan wrote to us,
Alan.
crystal clear water can still be tough to drink. because you were mentioning that it was crystal clear, Brian.
It was. I could see right to the bottom
great
of the bucket.
threshold for water quality. You can see through it.
So Alan went on a little tour of a former limestone mine in Louisville, Kentucky, and there was a natural spring in the mine. The water was, quote, crystal clear, 98% H2O. The only problem was the other 2% was magnesium oxide. And if you know Phillips' milk of magnesia does to you, which has almost no magnesium oxide, then you know why you shouldn't drink it. So you could have had an interesting afternoon, a couple of days with a nice sip of that water.
Yeah.
So I would steer clear. That's what we're getting at.
I wouldn't. I would go home right now, have a big old glass, and then report back.
Report back.
Pour it
We
through
should do it live.
Pour it through the
This is
finest,
a live podcast at my house. We'll do the show sipping
Yeah.
and then
my
from
water,
the hospital.
my crystal clear water. From the hospital.
Run it through the finest paint filter you can get from the store. I'm sure you'll be fine. Chris wrote to us a while back. I believe Justin said not to use mouse poison in the house. The mice end up dying in a wall somewhere and stink up the place. I had just put out several traps around the house when I heard this podcast. I get home and round them all up to toss them, but it's too late. About a week later, I noticed a terrible smell coming from a divider wall in our living room. It's been a week now, and the smell is so strong, nothing covers it. I will never poison again. Back to the snap traps. Great work on the podcast, guys. Love all the info, even if I get it too late. I just had a dead mouse, too. It was under my built-in bed. The cat chased it under there, and it snuck in between my unfinished molding and died of fear, I'm sure. And it took probably a good week before it was...
You didn't deconstruct the
Oh, no, I did. At 11 o'clock at night.
and got in there and
Because it
got
was
it
like
out.
you start to reason with yourself. You're like, well, maybe the smell's coming from
Something else.
something else, the
Yeah.
attic. Maybe it's like you're looking because it's
You
like
know.
if you've ever smelled a dead mouse or animal, it resembles the smell of some other things, it brings me back to my friend in high school who had never took his gym clothes out of the plastic bag in his locker. It smelled like that. Kind of a little oniony, a little, whatever. So you're checking through rank laundry. You're looking, for, did the cat throw up somewhere? Did the dog, whatever. But
Yeah, is it the cat? Yeah, did the cat roll in something?
Yeah. Turns out that it really was a mouse.
Those rodents.
But yes, don't poison them because they will go off and they will die, and then you will be stuck waiting out the smell.
So you're a fan of the snap traps?
I'm a fan of having a cat. I don't even know that I have mice before she catches them.
I don't like those.
Yeah.
I don't like those glue things. Those glue traps.
Brian's a big fan.
Brian has the worst story
Yeah.
about those
Can
ever.
you
I don't
tell
know.
the glue trap
I don't know.
story?
Yeah.
Can he?
I guess I can. Yeah, sure.
All right, go for
I
it.
don't have. We're not naming any names.
All right,
Yeah.
good.
Except for my father.
Yeah.
Who worked at a company that manufactured those glue traps. And this is a very short story. One day they get a package in the mail, and it is one of the glue traps. And the person who sent it in asked if it could be re-glued. It was no longer working. And when they looked inside the trap, it was a box, right? And when they looked inside the trap, there were mice feet stuck to the trap.
So many that it needed a new application of glue.
Apparently.
Did they just send him a new
Whoa.
one? I mean,
Stopped
what is a
working.
glue trap?
It's so gross.
probably cost-
It's a pretty horrific story.
It had to be cheaper
Yeah.
to just buy a new one than mail it in.
It might have been, yeah.
That is an old Yankee.
It is. That's a swamp Yankee.
I bought this, and I need a new
Yeah,
trap.
it's no longer working.
Yeah. It is too clogged
I've
up with mouse feet.
saturated it with mouse feet.
Just snipping them off or something?
all
Ugh.
right,
Yeah.
all right.
All right.
My cats, though, I agree with the cat.
Yeah, you got to get a cat.
I agree with the cat.
Brian, what are your cats' names?
They don't mess around.
Brian, what are your cats' names?
Boy kitty and girl kitty.
Yeah.
We're getting,
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, good. Just want to get that out there.
yeah.
All right. This is in fine cat building. All right. Let's move on.
Pet fancy.
Pet fancy. I wanted to tell you guys a story about I worked with some soapstone recently.
Yeah, I didn't hear about this.
Yeah, I did. For one of my brothers, he was waiting on me to do a fireplace surround out of soapstone. So he has a brick fireplace surround right now, and it's kind of outdated. He had the whole, the gold
Ooh,
stamped metal fireplace.
nice.
You know exactly the one I'm
Yep.
picturing too.
Does it have
It's
the
like-
little chains
I
behind
think
the
it
glass?
does. I think it does have the
Oh,
chains.
yeah.
Yeah, little
Chains.
chain mail
Little
stuff.
chain mail.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he was getting terrible air leakage between the brick and the drywall. I guess it was coming in through the framing there, like and like real bad. Like you could feel a breeze if you put your hand up to it. So we were air sealing that with some spray foam. And
Did you have to pull back the drywall at all to really get in there, or
No.
you just were able to sneak it in?
I mean, so what we really ended up doing, I'm sure, is treating it at the last possible place you can treat an air leak, which is
At the face of the
very
drywall.
most interior face of it. But
Yeah.
without tearing into the walls, I mean, what are you going to
Yeah.
really do? Seal it some better on the outside, I guess, but it's not clear where it's coming from exactly. And it's an older house, kind of cobbled together from parts from like an old school that was torn down. So it's like, you don't know what you're going to find. But anyway, he's a big Craigslist fiend. And so he tracked down some soapstone slabs, and I've been holding them at my house. He had me pick them up for him, and I've been holding them at my house for years now, like waiting for him to be ready for this project because he had other priorities. So anyway, finally show up there. When we finally get the measurements, he gives me the measurements. I've, of course, procrastinated actually going out and looking at the slabs I had for a long time and measuring them. And then, like, the day before I went, confirmed that we don't have enough soapstone to do what he wants to do.
Of course.
And he goes, okay, that's no problem. I've got another slab in my basement and actually another 2 slabs in my basement that were here when I bought the house. There used to be a dentist's office down in what is his walkout basement because the guy who lived there was a dentist and he brought a practice there. So we assumed that it was like from his like work surfaces. He had like that's big in chemistry labs and that kind of, because it's great non-porous surface. So like, okay, cool. So we got one of the pieces that he has, we can use that for the slab, the hearth. And then the piece that I'm bringing from home, we can cut that up and make the little slips that go up the sides and across the top. But
So I've never bought soapstone. Is there a consistency between slabs and one slab to another? Like if you said, well, I have a piece of granite down in my basement,
Well, so that-
I'd automatically be concerned, like, is this going to match? But is soapstone relatively consistent?
No, I think there's definitely different varieties of it. So it was a little bit of a gamble. So I brought my piece up there, and have you guys worked with soapstone at all? Have you had to tool it? So I've done a little bit of it, but not a lot. So this was kind of my first real show piece with it. And so I settled on a method of just using like a turbo blade in a circular saw, which is, for people who don't know, it's like a diamond impregnated masonry blade, but the style of it is called a turbo blade. And I mounted that in an old Bosch circular saw that is kind of my beater circular saw for cutting everything else but wood. And I set up I put the slabs down on the ground on a piece of 2-inch XPS foam as like a backer so that I could set the saw blade to cut all the way through. And then I just used a circular saw guide and I put down tape along the cut. And then I just
like your own shooting board kind of deal?
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
Okay. So the base of the circular saw rides on that shooting board. So it's riding on plywood.
I just used. It's actually not a plywood guide. I used this product. It's made by I think his name's Bora, and it's like a big long aluminum clamp that you can clamp. You can adjust how long it is, and then clamp it to either end, and it creates a fence.
Okay.
But then you have to add in the distance for the blade from the edge of the saw base.
Did you feel the need to do anything? Because I don't know. I mean, is soapstone, can it scratch easily? Did you do anything to protect?
I did put down a piece of painter's tape to try to reduce chipping along the cut, and it was fine. You get a little bit on the back side.
Okay. But you didn't scratch like the surface
No,
with like the
and if
base
you do,
of the
you
saw
can.
or anything?
I mean, you can sand it. Really,
Okay.
it's really kind of easy to work with that way. Okay. And he wasn't looking for like a super polished, clean look either. So we kind of, after I made the cut,
Multiple passes?
the first one I did multiple passes, thinking I'm going to go like an eighth of an inch at a time. The other ones, I just set it to the full depth and went, and
Really?
it was fine. Because I started to think about how masons use those big power saws to cut through bluestone and stuff, and they're pretty much just plunging and walking forward. I mean, there's a little bit of scoring and then going back, right? Right. I mean, what is it?
Yeah, I've always cut stone in multiple passes.
Yeah.
So that's why I was curious.
I actually had better cuts when I went full depth than when I went in passes because I was getting a little bit of wave with the shallow for some reason. I can't really explain it. The cuts weren't perfect.
Because the blade gets hot, I think. Right?
Yeah, and it was
warps a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And that beater saw blade in the arbor is probably all.
It might be, yeah. But anyway, so I got my cuts close enough that I was happy with, and then I took out a belt sander with rough sandpaper on it, and I just smoothed the edges with that. And this whole thing is insanely dusty. Like that's the other part I didn't mention. If you're ever working with soapstone, and it's really bad for you, it's not like, well, I'm going to throw on a dust mask. Like you do not want this in your lungs. Like it will never come out. So respirator, goggles, hearing protection, everything, because it's loud and it is dusty. And I had a shop vac there, so I took the hose and I plugged it in the back of the shop vac, so it was blowing through the hose, and I used that to clean everything off, clean myself off between passes, and obviously did the work outside. So anyway, I got the slab fitting well.
Wait, go back to the sanding for just a sec.
Yeah.
What grit did you use?
You said rough.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
He said rough.
The rough grit?
I think I had 80 grit in there, and I wish I had
coarse.
even coarser, because it really was not. And honestly, I wish that I didn't use that at all. That was actually Patrick McComb suggested a belt sander for roughing those out.
Throwing them right under the bus.
Well, no, because it worked okay, but I really wish that I had just bought like a diamond cup pad for an angle grinder, or even just put a turbo blade in an angle grinder and use that to smooth it out.
What were you trying to do? Were you trying to just smooth, like, were there like radial marks on that?
There's some of that.
Were you trying to ease the edge?
Some of that. I mean, easing the edge is great with sandpaper. It goes really fast.
Okay.
If you have like a wave that you're trying to get out by like flattening, it takes forever.
Did you try to use that new Lee Nielsen plane?
I did not. I did not.
All right. I would have given that a shot.
Yeah. I mean, if I had a bevel down version, maybe, but it had a bevel up, and I just don't think it was going to work for that.
Yeah.
So anyway, the hearth, of course, didn't fit on the first pass. It was.
Why would it?
It was too, yeah. Why would it? It was too tight.
And that's fine. Now you got to take off an eighth of an inch.
But that's actually not so bad. It wasn't bad.
Well, speak to that a little bit. I mean, was that yeah, because if you have like the full support of a big slab, you know what I mean. But did you have to take a blade width off, or
basically, yeah? And so
it was cool.
What I ended up doing was actually, because of those turbo blades, the grit on them is not just on the very cutting edge, like on a circular saw blade. It's on the sides.
Okay, so you can
sort of use it as a grinder. Exactly.
Cool.
So I was kind of just kind of grinding it off on the side, and it worked fine. Again, very dusty. And I set that down with construction adhesive, polyurethane construction
right
adhesive,
on brick,
because there's nothing in my life that I've found that doesn't fasten well with PL. This stuff is just awesome.
But so this is the hearth piece that was going over.
It was going over
brick?
it's like old terracotta.
Oh yeah, that red tile.
Everybody has.
Everyone has it. Okay.
And I knew that, technically mortar, right, or thin set or something else like that. And I said, nah, I'm using glue.
You said, where's this going to go?
Exactly. I said, what is PL not going to glue?
That's what everyone says.
So,
where's this going to go?
For the listeners like me who didn't know this, the turbo blade is not a brand. It's a style of blade.
Yes, that's what I was trying to explain. So, like, if you take there's masonry blades that have like little
segmented.
They have they have segmented masonry cutting blades, and the turbo are the ones that look. I don't know how to describe it.
They look fanned a little on the edges,
sort of like a fan.
Yeah.
Fan blades.
It's what you would see on an actual like mason saw, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have teeth. It has.
Yeah.
It's like a continuous rim, I think is a way to describe it. And then the two vertical pieces that make the sides of the surround, I just put more glue on those, tipped them up, and then I used just drywall, or used the long screws to just kind of pin them against the framing to hold them up, and they set up pretty quick, firm enough that they don't go anywhere. And then the top piece dropped on, and it was those lines between them were dead perfect. Put a little tape on either side of that seam and all the way around, and I used some nice black exterior sealant
on the seams.
Pushed that into the seams, then pulled the tape off for a perfect joint. It came out really nice.
And
then
you're cool.
I had to do a mantle, but the mantle did not come out nice because I didn't like the design that my brother forced me to do, and so I will never show you pictures of it.
So we need those pictures.
He likes it. He likes it though.
No, not really. It was more like we have to get this done by Christmas kind of a thing. And here's the moldings in my garage. Like as soon as it turned into like, it doesn't look quite right. Like he had a design in mind, and we executed that design, and then it was like, yeah, this doesn't look good. And he's like, well, what if we start adding this? And anytime you get into like, let's just start tacking on more moldings to try and save this, then I start going, okay, if you want me to, you know.
I think craftsmen we should start a new movement to go side by side with Keep Craft Alive. That is craftsmen taking a stand against the we've got to get this project done by the holidays thing. That it seems to happen every year to everyone in the business.
Yep. They have a big holiday party over there, and
yeah.
Can we talk about? So you're cool with just having this whole thing being adhered with construction adhesive?
Am I cool with it?
In terms of
clearly you're cool with it.
As a fastener or because it's a fireplace?
Well, it's a fireplace, and you're adhering soapstone to brick.
Fully expect that I'm going to get lambasted for that from the audience, but
okay. So can we?
Here's my justification for it. PL is designed to bond just about virtually any material. It can be used for brick and block and stone. So why would it not be okay to use that for soapstone to brick? And the brick surface is irregular enough that I would have had to use like a ton of thick set tile cement or mortar in order to get a good bond. And so I felt completely comfortable. I have zero worries that that's going to fall off.
Okay.
But I've been wrong by many things in the past. It's also for my brother. It's not for a client. What is the concern? You worried about it heating up or something?
Well, we spoke about this before. It's just like, it's this aversion. It's like an instinctual thing about like, oh, well, it's glue. It can't be strong enough. I need some kind of a mechanical fastener or something to bond this stuff. But maybe you're right.
So why is mortar strong enough, but glue is not?
Again, it's that instinctual thing. Mortar cures hard, and that must mean that it's strong.
You ever gotten PL in your leg hair?
Yeah, I have. That's a good.
Yeah.
What's with the draw rating of that?
It's a good test right there. You ever try to get that stuff off? I still have it on my hand right here. A week later.
So that means it's going to keep a few hundred pounds of soapstone, vertically on a wall for
Well, I
decades.
mean, also the mantle is holding up. The mantle fireplace around
it's captured.
It's captured.
Okay. Yeah. Did you just glue all that together too?
No, that's fastened to the studs.
Okay. I'm just trying to explore if there were alternatives. Yes, mortar.
Yes, there are.
But,
yeah, for sure, mortar.
How do they conventionally do a soapstone backsplash? I mean, I guess that's bearing on
silicone.
Yeah,
is usually how that's attached to the wall.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is bearing too. It's bearing on a hearth. It's bearing on a All
right.
Hey.
All right.
Do you feel I should have done it with thin set or with mortar?
No, I'm okay with the PL.
Yes, I got Brian. Rob. This is the other part that I didn't tell you.
What?
So I skipped over this part of the story. We realize halfway through doing this, I got the hearth down. We start getting ready to cut the pieces for the sides, and I go, I don't think I'm trying to remember what the reason was. For some reason I can't remember the actual sequence of events, but for some reason we decided, well, we need to get that second slab out of the basement. We used the first one, and we wanted the second one for some reason. We were going to use that. We ended up not using it, but so I go down there with the hand truck, and my brother's helping me out, and we're lifting this thing, and it's dark in the basement. He's obviously not using the slab, so it's like tucked behind a shelf, and it's like we're standing it up. It's 7 feet long, probably 30 inches wide, and we had moved the first slab, and it was heavy. We strapped it to the hand truck, and I kind of leaned it back and was pulling it, and he was helping me kind of jog it up over the steps, kind of lifting up the bottom. So we stand up the second slab, and it's a little bit thicker, and the edge is like more polished and like, more crisp. And I'm like, man, this thing is freaking heavy. And I'm going, I guess we're just getting tired or what? And get it out into the daylight and up the slope driveway, and I'm dying. This thing weighs so much. And I'm looking at it, and I was like, I go to my brother, I'm like, go get a cup of water and splash it on this thing. I want to see if this thing's color is going to match the one that we already have installed, because it looks like these are two different slabs. And he's like, well, why would they have two different slabs of soapstone in the house? And I said, I don't think this is soapstone. So he splashes water on it. It's freaking granite.
Nice.
He's got a dark grayish black granite slab that and at this point I'm like, well, great, I'm not gonna be able to walk tomorrow. But it was funny. I mean, I'm glad we figured it out before we went to put the saw blade to it. But
and And you're right. I mean, PL is recommended for that usage.
Really?
Well, it says, bonds, the most common construction materials such as wood, plywood, OSB, MDF, treated wood, hardwood flooring, concrete, stone, granite, marble, slate, masonry, brick, foam insulation of all sorts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're looking at PL Premium, too. Don't forget that. We're not talking about just any PL.
Yeah, PL Premium. Do you use PL Premium?
Yeah. That's the stuff, man. It does everything.
All right.
You can build a whole house with that. You don't even need nails or screws or anything.
All right.
That's my story. Sticking to it.
Okay.
You guys want to do some questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Let's do that.
Adam writes to us, fellows, I'm thinking ahead on my basement remodel and trying to decide whether I should glue down or float engineered wood flooring. Details. I have no moisture issues. The slab has poly under it. I've also air sealed and insulated the entire basement with rigid foam and Roxol mineral wool insulation. I'm looking at about 1,000 square feet of space, so gluing does not seem all that fun to me. And the floor has high spots in a few areas. What are the pros and cons of each, and what would you do? All right. So, basement flooring. Glue down or float engineered? Sounds like moisture is not going to be a problem. I mean, he says no moisture issues, and we also know the slab has poly under it. It's air sealed, insulated. I'm assuming when he says no moisture issues that he's been there for enough years to really know that, because sometimes it's not just I went through one season and it didn't get wet. Sometimes it really is like an every 3 to 5 year kind of a thing that your basement floods, which would make it more like a moderate risk as opposed to a low risk space.
Well, can we kind of before we get into the choices, can we mention the high spots?
Sure.
And I would recommend that regardless of the choice that he ends up making, he knocks down those high spots.
Does he have high spots or does he have low spots? That's the kind of the...
Either way, irregularities, I think.
Right, but would you float the low spots up to match the high, or would you grind the high spots down?
I don't know. I guess you'd have to assess how. I mean, you can use the self-leveling concrete if you have low spots and you want to fill them in. It's easy to work with.
Yeah, self-leveling stuff is fun.
It does a nice job.
Yeah.
But if he really just does have a few, like, if he just has some imperfections that are like ridges here and there that he wants.
Oh, yeah.
Then grind them down.
And how would you grind them down?
Depends, I guess.
Turbo blade?
I guess again, it depends on the size.
Would you put the turbo blade at like a 16-inch from the bottom of the circle
run that sucker
and just
around.
run it sideways?
Yeah, you could do that.
Now you can get like cup discs for an angle grinder. You can rent some stuff too at the rental centers. They have concrete grinding equipment that you can kind of buff things and flatten it out, and that might be worth a half-day rental to get you there.
Yeah.
I don't know, Rob. You did an article on a good hardwood floor over a basement slab.
Yeah, with Charlie Peterson, who's this renowned flooring guy down on the coast of Connecticut. He had a little bit of the project that I followed him completing was a little bit different in that he was addressing moisture. I mean, so he had assumed, or he was faced with the condition where he wasn't sure if there was poly underneath the slab.
Yep.
And I guess that's kind of hard to really
and we should
determine.
say there's no problem if you have... Even if you have poly under your slab, there's no problem with putting more poly over it. Concrete doesn't care if it's wet. It can stay wet.
Yeah.
It's fine. So if you're at all worried about that, of water coming up, then take the time to put down a heavy-duty layer of some sort.
Yep.
Reinforced poly or whatever.
And then he floated a subfloor over that poly.
2 layers a half inch.
2 layers a half inch.
Going perpendicular directions.
Yep.
Fastened to each other only or to the slab too?
Fastened to each other.
Yeah. And I have that same setup in my shop.
Yep.
Which is working out great.
Yep. And then he always opts for engineered flooring just because of, I guess, the basement is always going to be vulnerable to some kind of weather event or moisture. And so... A weather event, yeah.
You guys can never just say normal things, can you?
Well, you have to be like
Getting
super
wet.
general, I guess.
A weather event.
A weather event. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be more dimensionally stable than solid hardwood, and so just be...
That's true. Charlie Peterson knows what he's doing, but the stuff moves. I've seen a whole lot of engineered floating floors that have moved all over the place.
What do you mean by moved?
They move. The material moves with moisture, and you get
shrink and expand, or like buckle,
and
or
shrink and expands. And I believe it happens in multiple directions with that stuff, and I'm not sure why. But I've seen it where your gaps are happening
at the ends of the boards.
At the ends of the boards, and I've seen this in a bunch of situations. So
interesting.
How? I mean, so okay, so that might start getting into the type of engineered floor that you're using or the quality of the flooring that you're using.
It might.
Not all are created
It's
equal.
hard to imagine an quality engineered plank, which is essentially plywood with a thick veneer on top, moving substantially. I mean, I know that even plywood might move a bit.
Sure, and it will certainly cup and curl like anything else.
Right.
If you have moisture on one side but not the other.
Right.
I would
More so than solid hardwood, do you think?
Plywood cupping and curling?
So we know pretty much all building materials move to a degree.
Yeah.
So in this context, engineered flooring is very much like any other building material, so it is going to move to a degree. But in a area that is more susceptible than other areas of the house to moisture, is it still not best probably to go with engineered flooring over solid hardwood? Because I would imagine solid hardwood would has an expansion rate far greater than any engineered product.
You would think so.
I would think so, except Brian seems to be that's what we're made to believe, but Brian is saying he's seeing other things.
I'm just and I'm I'm not going so far as to say that it moves more than wood, or that it's not more stable, but like Rob just said, everything moves. And that's and I've seen in multiple occasions on slabs and in basements where engineered flooring products have been installed and they've moved a whole bunch.
So it's not a cure-all. It's not a get out of jail free card.
I don't think it's a get out of jail free card. And I also don't think that in basements,
do not pass go.
I mean, he may have the best of moisture protection in his basement with everything done right. There's still moist places, and even though you don't have standing water, there's still likely to be more moisture down there than maybe on the first floor or the second floor. And you can test that obviously and check that out. But
all right, recommendations.
And I don't know, but I don't know that I also I still don't know. I'm just giving cautions. I still don't know that. I would say go with the glue down.
What would you do? What's your recommendation? Make a choice. Boom, go.
More vapor protection above the slab.
Yep.
And then a floating setup.
A floating
engineered, like a snap lock kind of a floor.
I think so.
Floating over a subfloor or over that poly.
That I don't know about. I don't know enough to say what the subfloor adds in terms of moisture control and keeping that floor stable.
Well, Charlie didn't do a floating floor. He nailed it down to the plywood.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it comes down to,
It's if you need a fastening surface, you do the plywood.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's a little different.
And would you grind the high spots or would you fill the low spots on the slab?
I think that depends on it depends what the amount of work is.
Yeah.
If it's a lot of work, I'd fill.
I mean, the nice thing about the filling is that you don't have to figure out what the high spots are. The liquid will find the low spots.
Oh yeah.
And you just have to add enough that the high spots are not poking through anymore.
Right.
It's pretty brainless.
Yeah.
You don't need any fancy. Yeah. You just have to pay a little bit of extra money for that goop that you pour in there, the floor leveling stuff, underlayment. Rob, what do you think?
I'd probably follow similar approach to Brian. I'd put poly down because it's not that costly and not that labor intensive, and then you could just be sure that you're protected. Because maybe you might do a little excavation to check, because you're gonna have to check, especially if it's a remodel, you're gonna have to check below that slab somehow to be sure that there's a vapor barrier down there.
Well, he says that he thinks there is. He said the slab has poly under it. I don't know how he knows that. But
But maybe he built a house.
Maybe.
Okay. So in a new construction, you could be sure that it was all detailed properly and proceed. But in a remodeling context, I would just go on the side of caution, just put more poly down, and I'd make it pretty thick because it's just easier to work with. Or, poly, some kind of vapor barrier, poly, or that Delta FL, which is more of a rigid corrugated. It's not even corrugated plastic, but you could tape the seams, and it gives you a little bit of an air gap between the slab and your subfloor, so there is some level of airflow through there, and you can kind of wrap that up with the walls in detail and stuff, so it's all moisture tight. And then I'd do the floating subfloor, and I'd put engineered down to that subfloor.
I would be really tempted to go with the glue in this case, personally. I would fill the low spots and do a glue down. I think if he's confident in it not having a moisture problem, and if he has good dehumidification going down there, I'm not sure where Adam lives, and he thinks that he can keep humidity levels in an okay way. I mean,
and you would do glue
people
down?
Do glue down floors all the time.
Yeah.
You would do
a
glue down with engineered?
Yeah.
I mean, everywhere the houses are built on slabs, right?
Yeah.
They're doing glue
So
down.
it doesn't have to be a scary thing. And I
don't think it's that labor intensive either. I
It's
mean, you're
not.
spreading
It's
the glue
not
with the
bad.
trowel. And
So
it's a little bit of a stinky adhesive,
Yeah.
but it's very liquidy kind of a glue. It's very easy to work with.
So I'm not completely opposed to that because it does seem like, all right, that's probably a faster, easier install. I do, because I don't know enough about it, I do wonder, well, what if some of those engineer boards get damaged or need to be replaced? What does that replacement look like in terms of a glue down application?
Yeah, you lose some of that reversibility aspect, I'm guessing. I'm not sure what the demo of a glued down floor looks like.
Yeah.
Like when the next person buys the house. And you know, when we maybe you don't need to make all of your decisions based on restoration level carpentry, but I think considering reversibility is important.
Especially I don't know what's happening in the basement, but pretty beat up spot,
Yeah.
I know that and maybe it's just the install and the different glues are, behave differently, but I know when I installed, so I've got a very similar setup to this in a portion of my basement, but I didn't do wood because I knew that would get trashed immediately. So I did like that kind of higher end
You put laminate down.
laminate,
You can admit it.
vinyl,
That's
vinyl
right,
plank.
you put plank vinyl.
Yeah.
Just stuck down, right? Or stuck to
down.
itself.
I mean, they call it I think they refer to it as a gravity floor. So, well, because it kind of stays in place because they're pretty heavy,
Yeah.
And I mean, they're glued down, not in a continuous pass, but on every 2 to 4 feet, you have a pass of glue. And what the guy at the, it's a friend of mine, his father owns a flooring store. He said not to wet set those planks, to spread the glue, let it cure a little bit, and then install the planks on top of it. Because if you wet set it, you'll never get that plank up ever again. But if you let it cure a little bit and then set them in place, they're going to be adhered. But if you have to ever go back and replace them, you could more easily be able to just remove that tile and replace it. So I don't know if that's similar to what could occur in a engineered glue down system or not.
I don't love the snap lock clickety clack flooring because I just don't think it feels good underfoot. And I think if you're going all this route because you really think you want hardwood, it's not going to feel like hardwood as much. I don't think. I think it never really feels all the way convincing. And I think in the basement, you're already up against this feeling that you're always trying to overcome the fact that you're in a basement, and it's hard.
Yeah.
Like, you need to add a lot of extra light. You need to figure out the ceiling height to make it feel more open. And having something like a click-clack floor that you're constantly reminded that this thing is floating above the concrete because you have concrete. I don't know. It's just, I would not be looking at hardwood at all, though, unless I was, personally, I would want to do the floating subfloor thing and have something substantial to nail it down to. If he's not interested in doing that, then I would start to be going to other directions like, okay, why don't I just put down tile or the vinyl planks that are A, going to be inexpensive, B, totally moisture resistant, C, they don't have that click-clack thing. They stick right to the concrete. I think you had a great solution, and they're super high traffic, removable, all that stuff.
Yeah, it depends, I guess, the end use and the aesthetic of the space. One thing about that engineered flooring, and we'll put this article by Charlie Peterson up on the show notes page because he has a whole sidebar on how to choose engineered flooring.
Yep.
And what I had said 7 minutes ago is that engineered flooring is like a plywood substrate with veneers on top. That's not necessarily true. What he talks about in assessing the quality of engineered lumber is the higher end, more premium products have a plywood substrate. He calls out a particular manufacturer that has like a 9-ply birch plywood. What he sees, especially for manufacturers that are sourcing their wood from Asia, are fillets of wood with 2 layers of veneer. So it's not an actual plywood. They're actually additional veneers, usually of lesser quality wood,
Right.
and those have far more. They're just far less stable than actual plywood.
Yeah, this is the you get what you pay for stuff.
Yeah.
And we
Because you get that super cheap. We know where we could go and get super cheap engineered.
Yep.
With super thin veneers.
Yep.
So you won't be able to refinish them. They're not going to be as stable as you might want them to be, which is kind of the idea of going with an engineered floor to begin with. Quality engineered flooring is going to be a little bit pricier. It's going to have a true plywood substrate, and it's going to have a really thick, what they call the wear layer.
Yeah.
So that can be refinished. And
speaking of you get what you pay for, we were talking yesterday about the temptation of a plug and play ductless mini split that I uncovered. I was thinking about heating options for my shop. I'm getting to the point where I'm spending enough time out there and I've invested enough money in equipment that I am worried about rust. And I'm worried about the cycling of hot and cold, which leads to rust and, rust on your hand tools, rust on your power tools, things freezing, just like finishes like stains, paints, clear coats, glue, all that stuff is all affected by it. And now that I've insulated and air sealed, it's like, okay, am I willing to be at the point where I can say, yeah, I'm going to put some money towards keeping this conditioned at least to a low level so that my investment is protected and my life is a little more comfortable out there without having to fire up the wood stove constantly. So I started to look into those ductless mini splits that I wanted to see who had options for the ones that you could install yourself rather than having to have an HVAC guy come out and do it for you. Because what they have to do is they have to connect those refrigerant lines, and then they have to, vacuum, create a vacuum and fill them with refrigerant, et cetera, et cetera. I might be getting that backwards, but
they charge the line sets, right?
To charge them, yeah.
I think you need like specialty tools to do that.
Yeah, you have to have pumps, and it's not. I also looked into that at one point. It's not cheap enough that you buy the stuff and you can do it yourself. It's not going to be worth it. You should hire somebody if you're going to go that route. But there are companies that make these DIY ductless mini splits, and the one that I was looking at yesterday was Climate Right, is the brand name, and so the interior head of it has the refrigerant line set already attached to the back. So you hang the bracket on the wall, drill the hole, slide the tube through the wall to the exterior while mounting the interior blower unit. And then on the outside, you set the fan and the whole, what is it, a compressor, condenser? What do they call it? I forget.
Compressor.
Right? I can't remember. But you put it on the little pad. I get that confused all the time. For some reason, I can't keep that name straight in my head. The outdoor unit. You put the outdoor unit on a pad, and then you take it has like a little whip off the back of it of refrigerant lines. And then, so you connect those two lines, they kind of push together, and then you kind of wrench over this bracket that kind of snugs them up tight and locks them together. And plug it in, and you're good to go.
Yeah, it's a condenser unit, exterior condenser unit. But the line set, it's pre-charged, snaps right into the compressor, as they call it now. And they're saying just plug and play.
Did you say it's called a condenser and then you called it a compressor?
They refer to it as both.
Oh, okay. So I'm good. So I'm right.
So I think you're right.
I'm right either way. So yeah,
a little bit of a too good to be true kind of product, right?
What we didn't mention is that it costs $990.
Yeah.
For this
12,000 BTUs, right?
12,000 BTUs, which is enough for I don't know. I mean,
14,000 heating BTUs, 12,000 cooling BTUs.
Yeah, you're not supposed to put a stake in the ground and say like this many BTUs is good for this many square feet,
right?
Because there's so many variables. But we're going to put a stake in the ground. It's supposed to be for around 500 square feet, give or take. I think it is a variable. What is that term that they use? Where it will match its output to the size of the room. But so the question that kind of came up around the office is this too good to be true?
There's 18 reviews that are almost 5 stars.
Yeah, 4.5 stars.
Yeah.
I don't believe any of them. But
yeah,
I mean, it seems like they could get there. Obviously, they're demonstrating the technology. There had been, I talked to Patrick about this, our tools and materials editor who has looked into this stuff in the past, and there had been another unit similar to this on the market, promised to be plug and play, DIY install. It was pulled from the market rather quickly for
who knows why.
Who knows why. And then I think this is the first that he has heard of a similar unit coming back online.
Yeah. And
so we're going to get a whole truckload of them.
So if anybody has one, or knows somebody who's used one, let us know. I asked Martin Holliday, editor of Green Building Advisor. I like to run everything past him. Do you have his email that he sent back?
I'll take it up.
He wrote back immediately in list format with his thoughts about it. And if you could just read the numbered list for us, Rob, once you pull it up.
Justin, Robin, Patrick. Number 1, no explanation of the country of manufacture. Number 2, Climate Right in Ohio got to start selling air conditioners for doghouses. Period. 3, the specs for the mini split don't provide SEER information. 4, no specs on cold weather performance. 5, but hey, it's cheap. Martin.
That's why we love Martin. So I don't know. Take it with a grain of salt, but
we'll look into it. We'll continue looking into it.
It's still tempting compared to what you'd have to spend to have somebody come out and install it. You know, whether it makes any sense in the long run.
Yeah, or you just wasted $1,000 and
yeah. All right. Brandon writes, I'm a remodel contractor specializing in kitchen and bathrooms, mostly working in old homes. I work completely alone and enjoy the solitude, but lack the chance to pick the brain of other professionals. So I'm directing the question to you guys. Time and again, I run into these massive cold air return. Either the diffuser or the ducting is either in the way and a pain to work around. I'm guessing these massive returns were necessary for the old giant octopus furnaces. My question is, with these new high-efficiency furnaces, are these massive returns needed, or can they be downsized? Usually there's a huge return somewhere in the house that is sometimes 16 by 24 or more, and it's a huge eyesore.
You have one of these in your house, right?
I do, yeah. I have one right at the base of my stairs. I'm guessing it's 24 by 24.
It's big.
Yeah, it's big. And so people don't know what a giant octopus furnace was kind of the slang term for a gravity-fed furnace. And it essentially was like this. You may have seen them in old houses because they're pretty dramatic and scary looking when you go down in the basement. Yeah. It's like a big cylinder that's like floor to ceiling essentially, and it has like a ton of arms of round or square ductwork coming off of it and going all different places. And the way it would work was that it relied on the fact that heat rises and cooler air sinks. So it would come into the room and it would float and heat up, and as the air cooled, it would sink back down again and then drop into these ducts that would come back to the central unit where it would then be reheated and pumped back. You know, it would just kind of take advantage of the natural big convective loops, I guess. Obviously, that's not the way most modern furnaces work. So at least in my house, what they did was that when they decommissioned the big central octopus thing, they still used the big return air grate as the return for the system that they replaced it with. So I have one big return in my house for all of my heat, which is not ideal. You obviously want to have supply and return in each room so that you can get even heating and cooling. You also, I haven't seen this, but I know that I haven't encountered this on jobs, but they also have, I believe sometimes these returns can be in a wall, like at the very base of a room. Whether or not you can get rid of them, I would say sure. I mean, I know that in a lot of old houses, they cover them up when they're decommissioned and they put flooring over them. So in that case, you would just essentially frame flooring underneath it, like floor joists, and then drop a piece of sheathing in there, fasten that down, and then you can patch in the flooring. And we actually did an article on patching in a floor that with a guy named Scott Seidler, that was essentially this process. They were removing an old vent in a floor, and they patched it in to make it look like it was never there.
And then just run new returns?
Because they had moved to another heating system.
Okay.
So, I mean, so when you say, like, can we get rid of them or make them smaller, it's like, well, no, not unless you're also touching the heating and cooling system, because that's a whole different animal. Sometimes you can get rid of them because you've changed your heating and cooling system, but you can't just decide, well, we have a new furnace and it's better, so I don't need as much, so I'm going to change the size of this because it's in my way.
So
not without talking to an HVAC guy.
Yeah.
So in your case, did they? You may not know this because you didn't live there with the original furnace, but did they downsize the duct?
I don't think so.
return
The duct looks
or is it
pretty
still
old.
Oh, so it might be the original duct.
So what they did was it's a big hole in the floor. It's like a sheet metal, on the top is a big cast iron grate, and then there's like a sheet metal box, and that sat right on top of this big round octopus thing in the basement. So they screwed down, whenever this happened, I don't know, they screwed down a piece of sheet metal at the base of this hole in my floor, and then they ducted sideways off of it. So they're still using that big square
Plenum,
recess, the plenum, but instead of coming straight
down,
up, they're
right.
going off the side and connecting that way. And they chose to leave the furnace in the basement. In most places, a lot of times they remove them. Mine is cool. I'm glad they left it. I'm sure it would have been more of a hassle to get out than it was worth it. They just decommissioned it and left it. And so it's. I realize that's kind of not a very satisfying answer, but the answer is don't screw with it if you don't know what effect it's going to have. You can't just willy-nilly change the size of things. You'll throw things out of balance.
It's a designed system. And so as you start to chip away at it, I mean, theoretically, like you're going to throw it out of balance. And so, it needs to be redesigned.
But you don't necessarily have to use that anymore. If you can often, I'm sure an HVAC contractor can provide you with supply and return elsewhere in the room in a more conventional manner that would allow you to then decommission the big version of it. All right, so we got time for one more. Jeff, what do we got? What time are we at?
We're like 15 minutes.
All right, we're going to go long today, boys, because Wade wrote to us, "Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for your excellent podcast. I found you 3 months ago and have enjoyed listening to all of your shows. I've attached pictures of the seam between our garage wall and ceiling. For some reason, the builder finished the ceiling, but left a 1.5-inch gap between the two. When we bought the house 2 years ago, the inspector suggested that I add some trim to close up this gap, as it's dangerous in the event of a fire. The gap goes back 2 to 4 inches, depending on the location. Can you think of a reason they may not have finished it?" That's the first question. The second is, how do I air seal and insulate this? It's too big to buy 30 cans of great stuff. Spray foam. Just some more quick background. Above the garage is the living room and family room. I live in Roanoke, Virginia, which can get down to 0 in the winter, but our climate is also wet with high humidity, lots of rain. And it's a brick house with a poured concrete basement.
I mean, this gets at, so this is an issue that should be addressed. I mean, we had mentioned, I think in the last podcast or the one before that, about all that nasty stuff that's in the basement or in that garage that may be below living space. Like he's got gas cans here. He's got like his chemical cabinet. You can see. He's got the lawnmower there. All the stuff that you don't want to be breathing in any of that air.
It looks like it has a double top plate on the wall, but the drywall only goes up to the single top plate. So it's just like 1.5 inch or 2 gap at the top.
What's the finish on those walls?
I wrote back to him. I was like, "Why do your walls look like they're gray OSB?"
So that must be the gap, right?
And he was like, "Oh, I could see why you're saying that. They must have used OSB to form the walls."
So that's concrete.
Oh no, that's concrete.
I don't think so.
Right?
No, because I think he's saying, but left a 1.5 inch gap.
Oh no, I'm sorry. They must have used it to form, and then pulled the OSB off and used it to sheathe the walls. I don't think that they're concrete. I think that they're.
Well, he's saying that the gap goes back 2 to 4 inches depending on the location. So I'm wondering, is that actually OSB? Is there a framed wall? Like, is that not concrete? Is that a framed wall?
Sill?
Well, what's happening
You know what I mean? So that's
here-
part of the gap. Like the drywall on the ceiling goes to the top plate,
1.5 inches.
furred out.
It's a plate. It's a 2x plate, 1.5 inches. And the
Or it could be 2
drywall
inches.
is applied to the joists above.
Yes.
Right? And this is the top. Whatever we're seeing here is aligned with the top. If that's not concrete, it looks like OSB. So
Yeah,
it's aligned
gray
with the top
OSB.
of the
It's weird.
concrete wall. I don't know why they did it, but that's what's happening.
So are you thinking maybe it's not
that is
OSB?
concrete.
Maybe they used OSB to form a wall? I asked him this question. He wrote back. I don't have my computer with me, though, so I don't have the answer. But that there was some kind of explanation about it. About
So you think maybe that's concrete that was formed with OSB, and that's why it looks like OSB?
yeah, or it's.
I'm trying to see what kind of fasteners he's used to secure his little.
Do you see fasteners in the OSB?
I'm trying to see.
Because that will tell us whether it's just nailed to the wall.
Yeah, I mean, or those other form. I think it's concrete, right?
Jeff's on there.
Jeff.
What seam, Jeff?
Yeah, it looks like concrete.
Yeah.
These are OSB formed concrete walls.
Yeah.
And they put this.
Especially because there's little particles that were left in there and ripped and.
Yeah,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
put the drywall up against the joist, so there's your gap that they left is the height of the.
So what we're seeing
plate.
here is that he's got a plate on top of a concrete wall.
Yeah.
And so one way you can tackle that is to stick some Roxol or fireproof insulation in. You can air seal the plate, like with some spray foam. You don't need to fill the whole thing. You can just use it to air seal the connection between the plate and the concrete and the plate and the drywall and the ceiling, and then you can stuff some fireproofing Roxol or something in there as insulation.
I mean, that's a big, that fire stopping.
Yeah. It's a big risk.
Is important.
Yeah.
For sure.
So I guess in this context, because Roxol does qualify, right? Some
Yeah,
jurisdictions.
absolutely. Yep.
Okay. So you could stuff that in as many of these cavities as he can, and then he could.
But that doesn't air seal.
No, then he could go back. I think he could go back and whatever he wants to do to air seal.
No, I think you're going in the opposite direction. I think you air seal it first, then you use the Roxol to fireproof it. I mean, if it was me, I disagree that it's too big to buy 30 cans of great stuff. It's an inch and a half. You buy one of those pro style
Spritz a little water
spray
in there.
foam guns with the reusable where you screw the can on top. You get the fire foam and you spritz a little water in there and you go down and you lay a fat bead. That thing will fill right up, no problem. You probably do the whole thing in 1, maybe 2 cans. That's not a big problem.
So I would air seal it.
If you want to then trim it back, I like to take like a V-notch flooring trowel and just press it flat against the wall and kind of use it like a saw motion to trim it flush.
Don't they have like fire rated
Yeah.
foam?
Yeah.
So would you just use that?
It's like orange color. Yeah.
Yeah. So
For
just
sure.
use that. But would you then do anything to bridge this gap and cover that foam? Or would you just like say whatever?
Well, then that becomes aesthetic. Right?
Yeah, it's aesthetic at
You
that
could
point.
put up crown molding if you wanted to.
Yeah.
If it was going to get any sunlight, you'd want to paint it with something to protect the foam because
Yeah.
it will
Oh, that's true.
degrade
Okay.
with UV.
But yeah, just foam it.
Yeah, I mean that's what I would
Fire-rated
do.
foam.
You're insulating and air sealing in one step, and but yeah, you got to take care of this. That is a fire risk for sure.
I'll say this.
What do you say?
I like that look of the OSB formed concrete walls.
It
I
ain't
would have
bad.
done them horizontally.
Oh, have you seen when they've
I
done
like it.
Have you seen it when they've used like either planks or boards
I love
to buy?
board formed concrete.
Yeah, looks
it's
great.
dynamite.
Like a retaining wall situation.
Yeah.
I guess I'm looking at this going, why the hell did they use OSB for these forms though? Like, if you were going to pour concrete, did the builder make his own forms instead of hiring somebody?
Maybe.
I mean, obviously, the fact that it's
Yeah.
OSB makes it seem like, well, then it had to be somewhat recent. It's not like this was done in the 50s.
Right.
He's got a nice benchtop vise there.
All right.
Yeah.
That's nice.
All right. That's all we got for this week. Send us your questions and comments at fhppodcast@taunton.com. Visit findhomebuilding.com/podcast to check out the video. Hit that thumbs up button on YouTube. Let us know what you think. Tell a friend. All the things. And be sure to check out Shop Talk Live with a little guest appearance and support that podcast as well. That's it. This is Justin for Brian and Rob saying happy building and keep craft alive.